All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Sharing it. Okay. You guys can see the screen again, the text.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So those are following along with the recording. I apologize. We're just now starting the Mishnah of chapter 2, and I forgot to record the first half hour. All right. Sorry about that. So the idea here is that what they see is God sees your behavior, wearing sackcloth and fasting. That's just an outer manifestation to get us in the mood to really change our behavior. And then it says, Amdu b'tfilah, they stood in prayer. Moridin lifnei hateva zakein v'ragil v'yesh lo banim uveito rekam sheyehi libo shalem b'tfilah. And we get this long list of things that who's the zakein, who should stand for and lead the worship on this very serious day, this day of fasting and mourning and grieving for the fact there's no water. Should be somebody who has children, but his house is empty. Okay, we're going to find out what that means, although it seems to me the way he translates it here is he must be poor. Because then he's really feeling it, right? He has kids in the house, can't pay for them to eat. He doesn't have enough for them to eat. So when he prays to God, he really means it. It doesn't help to have somebody who's, again, to bring up Texas, having Ted Cruz pray on behalf of the people doesn't really help because he's off in Cancun enjoying himself. He doesn't feel it like the person who is really suffering. So that's the person who should lead, this zakein. Then he says these 24 blessings, right? It's the 18, the Shemona Esrei plus the 6 additional blessings that we say every day. Shebachol Yom. Umosif alehem, so it's these 6 additional ones. And this was I was also confused about because it wasn't clear, and Steinsaltz doesn't clarify it. At first, it seems like there's 2 different ways of getting to 6. It says Elohein, Zichronot v'Shofarot. That's, if you remember, on Rosh Hashanah, we have 3 additional sections on Rosh Hashanah liturgy in the Musaf. We have Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. These are special prayers with 10 verses referring to these themes: kingship, remembrance, and shofar. And he says on these drought days, when you're praying these extra blessings, you say the Zichronot and Shofarot sections, and then he gives 4 verses, which I assume allude to 4 psalms that you would recite. That Psalm 120, 121, 130, and 102. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't have to say the Zichronot and the Shofarot. So is he saying that you say those four psalms, but I've got a different rendering because you don't have to say the Zichronot and the Shofarot, or is he saying these are just additional passages and then you get to the 6 additional blessings? I couldn't tell.
I took it as the 6 additional blessings are either remembrances, the Shofarot, in the 4 Psalms, or at least these verses from the 4 Psalms. Mm-hmm. That's the first version. And the second version is that instead it's this verse from Kings, this verse from Jeremiah, and then the 4 Psalms.
Okay. Yeah, that could be right. So he could be saying, right. So he's got, instead of the Shofarot and the Zichronot, he's got these 2 other passages.
So he's still got 6.
Right. So he's got 6, but then it goes into the 6 blessings. So it wasn't clear to me, like, is this an introduction to the 6 blessings, or do they have, when they call blessings, basically it's these 6 scriptural passages maybe concluded with a blessing statement. And then we have these other 6, because the other 6 are because now we have a very different explanation. It says, and he says, Ve'omer chot mehen. And he says the 6 conclusions to the blessing. So maybe one way of doing it is you have these 6 verses. We have 2 different choices, followed by a concluding blessing in each case. But then we have Ala Rishonahu Omer. So is this it wasn't clear to me, and Steinsaltz didn't help us with this, if what comes now are additions to those original 6 verses and their blessings. Or is this a new series?
I read it as a new series, and then the first 2 being options. You had said before that there's prayers that we do twice because the books weren't published, so
right.
So not everybody knew everything.
Right.
So I think the option was, since they're not having a rabbi do it, they're getting just the oldest person, the most experienced, whichever one they're better at and can get correctly is the one that they'll do, and then they'll conclude with these blessings, and that's sort of, I guess, the right way to do it, I guess, would be the way, sort of as a, like the blessings that we say twice. Once, because not everybody would know, then we're going to do it the correct way the second time.
Right. Although in that case, what we're doing is
going for.
Right. In that case, you say the blessings to yourself, and then they're repeated. Here, I don't think this is a repetition. I don't think there's a distinction between private and public recitation. It's just not clear to me exactly. Like if we were looking at a prayer book, if they did a prayer book today, and I was looking in the prayer books I have, and I don't have any prayer books that I'm aware of that has, because there are times when in Israel today, they'll declare a drought and they'll do this. But I don't have, none of the prayer books that I have that are, complete prayer books had the service for days of drought. So I don't know exactly what the order would be if we did it today.
Well, at least with Steinsaltz's added comments in this, I took it as, okay, so I just told you what sort of the main parts of the 6 additional blessings are, whichever 6 you pick. And now each of them has its own special ending, and here's the list of the endings.
Yeah, maybe that's it. That's it. It just read to me very oddly, the way that there's a 6 and now we've got another 6. Well, in any case,
it says their conclusions, or at least
they're unique.
Right. The conclusions means the closing blessing.
Yeah.
That's what chot mehen means.
Okay, but so like for the first blessing, he recites. So presumably that's the conclusion
Right.
of the blessing. So I think it's added right after the.
Right. But so that's what wasn't clear to me, because the chot mehen would be like, and then he says, Baruch atah Hashem Goel Yisrael. That's the chotam. But then when we go Ala Rishonahu Omer, it's more than the concluding blessing. We have now a little passage that we're reading. So do we read the passage with that first verse? Is that how they put it together? Or do we read the first 6 verses here and then we go to the 6 blessings? It wasn't.
I think that as we do it after each verse, you do the appropriate, this additional stuff.
Right. Well, that's definitely right. That's clear here. For the conclusion
without having a copy of their prayer books.
Right. See, exactly. And notice, in the Hebrew, al harishonahu, on the first what? He sticks in the first conclusion.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wait a minute. Oh, so you're saying, so it flows with what just came before it. He says the chotam, the Baruch atah Hashem, and here's the chotam. Here's what they say. But if you look at the Hebrew, it says they say these 6 verses, then they say the conclusion, the closing blessing. Oh, and by the way, here it's almost like you start all over again. For the first of the 6 additions, you say, the one who answered Abraham at Har Moriah, he will answer you, and he will hear the voice of your crying out on this day. And here's the conclude, and then you say the concluding blessing. So that's where I was lost a little bit. Steins also makes it seem like it's all seamless. But it, as I've been pointing out as we've been going along, it's not always so seamless. Sometimes they put stuff together, they edit things. We assume it's seamless because we assume that the Mishnah is just a text that somebody's writing down. Okay, here's the words of the Mishnah, and we're writing the Mishnah down. They're like sitting down at one setting. But it is possible that there were different texts that they're sticking together. And this one, they just kind of, it fit together. You know, we talked about the 6, and now we're going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But it could be that they're actually, this is one way of doing it. You read 6 verses, and then you say the blessings. Oh, and here's another way of doing it. You do a little poem. The one who answered Abraham and Har Moriah, he will answer you, and here you're crying out, and here's the blessing. So I don't know. I mean, you could be right. It could be that they're all pushed together, but it's just, I noticed that, you know, you got 6 and then you got another 6. So I just pointed that out. I don't know. But here are well, in any case, they're telling us here's how it looked, at least, with an introductory verse, a liturgical statement about, and notice they're all similar. The one who answered Abraham, he will answer you. And then we say, Goel Yisrael. Then the second one, the one who answered, may the one who answered our ancestors at the Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, may God answer you and hear the voice of your crying out. And then you get the second blessing, which is now an additional, which is a new one. Zochera Nishkachot, that's not in the Amidah. On the third one, we have, may he who answered Joshua at Gilgal, may he answer you, you're crying out in prayer on this day. And the conclusion there is Shomea Trua, who hears the Trua, the call of the shofar, Trua. The fourth edition, one says, may the one who answered Shmuel b'mitzpah, Shmuel at Mitzpah, may he answer you again with the sound of your crying out on this day. And here the conclusion is Shomea Tza'aka, who hears the crying out. The fifth one is, may he who answered Eliyahu at Har HaKarmel, right? That's the famous story where there's like a shootout at the OK Corral where Eliyahu is against these priests of Baal, and he calls on God. He pours tons of water on his offerings, and then God sends a lightning bolt and burns up the whole offering. He has to run away into the desert at that point. That's at Har Carmel. And the conclusion there is Shomea Tefillah, who hears prayer. And then on the 6th additional blessing, or the 6th blessing, he recites, may he who answered Jonah in the bowels of the great fish, may he answer your cries on this day. And the special blessing there is Ha'oneh be'et tzara, who answers you at a time of trouble. And then it throws in on the 7th. Wait a minute, I thought you said 6, but okay. On the 7th, may he who answered David and Shlomo, his son, in Jerusalem, Hu ya'aneh etchem v'yishma b'kol tzakatchem hayom hazeh, he will hear your cries and answer you. And then the conclusion, Hamirachim al haaretz, who is compassionate, merciful on the earth. And now we didn't get, I'm trying to remember, this gets into the Gemara. Yeah, so we did, so we got 7. Yeah.
For the part about Jonah, about the trouble, what I got from it, since Jonah gets swallowed by a fish while he's running away from his duty, I kind of like that as a notion of it's trouble, even when it's trouble that we brought upon ourselves.
Ah, good. That's nice. Nice interpretation. Now, we'll get to why they have 7. Because in fact, it's really 6 additions. That first one about Avraham, that is an addition to the normal prayer that we have in the Amidah, the regular prayer, Goel Yisrael. It's the 4th addition to it's a 4th petition in the Amidah. So we have that every day, but this one, it's been expanded on these fast days. And then then there's 6 additions. So it's a little confusing because they said there were going to be 6, And he explains it. It's actually the sixth additional blessing. It's the first blessing listed here as an expanded version of the weekday blessing. Okay. And they talk a little bit more about that, I think, in the Gemara, if I remember. So then we get a little, again, an experience case law here. Ma'aseh b'mei Rabbi Chalafta Rabbi Hananya ben Tarajon. In the days of Rabbi Chalafta and Rabbi Hananya ben Tarajon, someone who would pass before the ark in their community, they would finish the entire blessing of the fast day, but the congregation didn't answer Amen after him. And we'll see in a moment why, because the sages disagreed with that opinion. Instead, the attendant of the synagogue said, sound the shofar with a long wavering sound, priests, blow the shofar. Tiku hakonim tikau. And then they would say, Misha na et Avraham Avinu behar Moriah, hu ya'neh etchem v'yishma b'kol tzadkatchem hayom hazeh. And then they'd say, Hariyu b'nei Aharon Hariyu. Misha na. So they had a different way of doing. They would, in between these different 6 sections, they would blow the shofar, and they would use different terms for the blowing. So it must have been a different, just like we do on Rosh Hashanah. The tekiah is the long solid blast, and the hariyu refers to the teruah, which is the broken blast, the wavering blast. And then so here we go. When they came before the sages, Amru lo hayinu nohagin kain. You don't act that way except at the eastern gate at the temple, meaning that you outside the temple space, you do answer Amen. At the temple space, you don't answer Amen during the ceremony. So here now they've brought in the temple again. So again, it's very hard to know the history of this. Are they saying that that temple was the only place where you didn't answer Amen to a blessing? We'll find out in a moment what they do answer. There was a response when you heard a blessing in the temple, but it wasn't Amen. Amen was only for outside the temple, or maybe after the destruction of the temple. Or are they saying that this was going, and so we don't do that? Or are they saying when there would be drought days and fasts because of the drought during the temple period, they would act in this way at the eastern gate, but in the rest of the country, they would do what we just read, and they would say Amen. So it's not clear to me whether this is the sages saying post-temple, we don't say, we don't do what Rabbi Chalafta and Rabbi Hananya did. That was exclusively during the temple period. Or if they're talking about contemporarily, only in the temple did you do this, but everywhere else you did something different. Very unclear. Not always so clear how to read the history of the period. Now, then we get a little bit more. This is still the Mishnah. Shalosh taniyot or rishonot anshei mishmar mitanin velo mashlimin. On the first 3 set of fasts, the priestly, the Anshe Mishmar, the priestly watch who were in charge of the temple that week, and the Anshe Beit Av, Lo Hayu Mita Anin Klal. Now, this was something that was very frustrating to me that Steindels doesn't explain. In the temple period, in the time of the temple, so we're going back to the temple again. It's it's hard to know if they're reading back or if this is what they actually did regarding drought days and fasts during the temple period. Okay. In the temple period, they broke up all the priestly groups into 24. 24, I think, right? Yeah, I think it was 24. And each group would serve 2 weeks in Jerusalem. So they would travel down to Jerusalem. And then the communities where they left, there would be these groups who they would get, because it was an honor for their community to be serving the temple, they would have certain prayer worship services during that week. But the priests serving in the temple, and then of the priests in that group, every day, a section of those priests would serve in the temple and make the offerings. And that's what the Beit Av is. That's what, or what he calls patrilineal family. I don't know why he couldn't explain that to us, because what is that? What's a patrilineal family? It doesn't even make any sense. So, but that's what they would do. So on the first 3 fasts, the members of the priestly watch who were in charge of the temple that week fast, but they don't complete their fast because they have jobs to do in the temple, and they have to, be focused. And the members who were working on that day, that specific day, they didn't fast at all. On the second set of 3 fasts, the members of the priestly watch fast and complete the fast because it's a more serious thing. But the members of the group who are focused on temple services, the temple cult rituals that day, they fast a little bit, but they don't complete the fast. And on the final group of fasts, which is the most serious, everybody fasts, even if you're working in the temple. And that's Rabbi Yehoshua. This is Rabbi Yehoshua's opinion. The majority opinion, Rachamim Omrim, on the first 3 fasts, the members of both groups don't fast at all because, again, their responsibilities. The second 3 fasts, a little bit more serious. The members of that priestly group who's working that week, they fast a little bit, but they don't finish the fast. The members who are working that day, out of that group, who are doing the sacrifices, they don't fast at all. But on the final 7, the priestly group that's serving for those 2 weeks, they fast, but they fast completely. But the group that is actually responsible for the sacrifices that day, they don't complete the fast. Anshe mishmar mutarin lishtot yain b'laylot. Now they go on to a different topic. They talk about, now we're not talking about fast days, we're just talking about in general. The group, the priestly group that's coming to serve those 2 weeks, they are permitted to drink wine at night, but not during the day, because they might have to help with the temple service, and you don't want to be, you want to be fully cognizant. The members of the patrilineal, again, the members who are responsible for the sacrifices that day, that particular day, don't drink wine at all, because they've got these jobs. And it's prohibited for both members of the priestly of the group that's there, the groups of priests on that 2-week time, and the ones who are working on those days, on those specific days, to cut their hair or launder their garments throughout the week. But on Thursday, it's permitted to them to cut their hair and launder their clothes in deference for Shabbat. Now we go back to the fasting. Kol ha'katuv b'Megillat Ta'anit delo lemispad lefanav asur la'acharav mutar. We talked about this text known as Megillat Ta'anit, which is different from our Masechet Ta'anit. Megillat Ta'anit is a text written around the Second Temple time. We don't have an example of it, but it had all of these special days when good things happened, or festive days that you weren't supposed to mourn. So any day in which it's written in this Megillat Ta'anit of festive days, minor festive days, one is not supposed to eulogize on that day. And not only that, but you're not supposed to eulogize the day before. So if there's a funeral, you don't say a eulogy on the day before of this mini holiday or on the day itself, but the day after you are permitted, if the funeral was the day after. Rabbi Yossi says it's prohibited to eulogize on both the day before, the day following, and on the day itself. And I just point out that this is still true today. The only days that we really have, which were once in Megillat Ta'anit, that we observe are Purim and Hanukkah. And if there is a funeral during Hanukkah, you're not supposed to express a eulogy. You're not supposed to say a eulogy. Of course, and I've seen Orthodox rabbis do this as well. They say, today we're in the midst of Hanukkah, and because of the celebration, we don't eulogize. But let me just say a few words about the deceased, because obviously it's very important for family members to hear that. It's hard to not eulogize, unless, of course, the person, and it is actually permissible for the deceased person to say, "Do not eulogize me," in which they won't eulogize. They, people will follow those rules. In any case, that's one thing. Then, of course, with regard to our tractate, we get to fasting. On those mini holidays, you're not permitted to fast, but it is permitted to fast on the day before or the day after the mini holiday. Rabbi Yossi says fasting the day before is prohibited, but following day is permitted. So you could fast on the day after this mini holiday. And then we also have another rule about setting fasts up. We've been talking, these fast days, they're not consecutive. It's Monday, Thursday, Monday. That's the series of fasts. So you can't start on a Thursday. That's the problem, because the fear is it might cause an increase in prices. And as he explains, Steinsaltz explains, if the first of a series of fasts is on Thursday, then on Friday, everyone will come to purchase their food for after the fast and for Shabbat, which will allow the store owners to take advantage of the crowds and raise their prices. Or it's also possible, and I think he may have put this in a note, they may run out of food. They may say, oh my goodness, we're not going to have enough food. So they start raising prices, or they just make it harder for people to get, they'll be bought out too quickly. So rather if you're going to set a series of 3 fasts, you set it up on a Monday. So it's a Monday, Thursday, following Monday. But since already you've begun the fast process, it's okay if the next series begins on a Thursday. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. He says, just as the first 3 fasts don't begin on Thursday, so the second set of fasts should not begin on a Thursday either. Start all of them on Mondays. And then the conclusion of the Mishnah, we've got Ein gozrin ta'anit al tzibur b'roshei chodashim. You don't you don't decree a fast. Of course, we know this from Ta'anit Megillah. You wouldn't decree a fast on Rosh Chodesh, or on Hanukkah, or on Purim. But im hitchilu ein mafsikin. But if you started your series of fasts on Hanukkah, that run into Hanukkah, so you started it before Hanukkah, but the Monday or that Thursday or Monday following is the holiday of Hanukkah, then you do fast, but you don't finish it. You fast a little bit, but in honor of the holiday, you don't complete the fast. That's according to Rabban Gamliel. Amar Rabbi Meir, afal pisha amar Rabban Gamliel ein mafsikin, modeh haya she'ein mashlimin. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, I think I got the mafsikin. You don't interrupt. Mafsikin here is interrupt. If you started the series of fasts, but one of those fast days falls during Hanukkah, you keep to the series of fasts. You've begun the series and you don't stop. So you would end up fasting on Hanukkah, but Rabbi Meir explains that what he meant is you can fast, but you don't, just like we saw before with the priest, ein mashlimim, you don't finish the fast, you don't complete the fast. V'chein Tisha B'Av shechal lihiyot be'erev Shabbat. Also Tisha B'Av that occurs on Shabbat Eve. So the fast is not completed and you eat a little bit before the start of Shabbat so as not to enter Shabbat fasting. All right, let's just finish up. Let's do a little bit more here. I think, just a little bit more. So we start the Gemara and it begins, Seder Tanit Ketzad Motzi'in et HaTeva. And they say, Fa'afilu b'kamiyata. They remove the ark, and is the ritual performed even on the first, the kamiyata, the first set of fasts? So do we start taking out I had mentioned before, it was the last group of fasts, but here they're asking. Uraminhu, shalosh taniyot rishonot ushniot nichnasin leveit haKnesset umitpalin kederach shemitpalin kol hashana kula. It says, there's a Baraita that says on the first and second series of fasts, you go into the synagogue and you pray in the manner that they pray throughout the year. Uvesheva achronot, the last series, the 7 of them, motzi'in et hateva lirchova shel ha'ir v'notnin efer al gabei hateva, and you place ashes on the ark and the head of the Nasi, the head of the president of the Knesset, of the Sanhedrin, uverosh av beit din, the deputy. V'chol echad v'echad notel v'notein b'rosho, and everybody else takes ashes and places on their own heads. And Rabbi Natan Omer, Efer mikle hein mevi'in, they bring burnt ashes, not just any kind of ashes or any kind of dirt, because Efer can be dirt too.
Oh.
So you don't just bring dirt and put it on your head. It's got to be specifically burnt ashes. Amar Rav Papa ki tanan nami matnitin asheva achronot tanan. So Rav Papa said in explaining, when we taught the Mishnah as well, we were referring to the last series of fasts, the last 7 fasts. So in fact, it is the 7. Now, Uva Rosh Hanas, let's see. And now we ask about Rosh Hanasi. So this is very interesting. And right afterwards, the Hadaratane, first it talks that the ashes are placed on the head of the Rosh Hanasi. Afterwards, it says everybody puts ashes on their own head. So Ini, is that correct? We have a Baraita which teaches Rabbi Omer, Bigdula matchilin mina gadol, ubiklala matchilin mina katan. So we have this principle, according to Rabbi, that's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who put together the Mishnah. When it comes to acts of greatness, then we start with the more important people. And when it comes to a curse, we begin with the bottom, the common people, the least important members of the group, which seems to contradict what we just read, that we start putting ashes on the Nasi, and afterwards we put ashes, and afterwards everybody else puts their ashes on. Why do we start with the Nasi? This is clearly not an act of greatness. Bigdula matchilim mina gadol. Oh, and then we have proof text. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon ule Elazar ule Itamar. So in that case, Moshe began with Aharon, who was the high priest, and then his sons, who were just regular priests. But in the case of a klala, matchilim mina katan. The example was, first God cursed the snake, the serpent, and afterwards he cursed Chava, and afterwards he cursed Adam. So we went from the least important to the most important, and of course, once again, women get pushed aside. But okay, that's their interpretation. And the conclusion here is ha-chashivuta ledidhu, de amru lahu atun chashivitu limaba'e alan rachamei akule amal. This is a little bit different. In this case, again, we're going back to this symbolic role that the leader has. In this case, it is considered important to start with the leaders, because they're the ones who we believe can have the most impact of asking for mercy on everybody. So we start with that individual. Now let's see what we got to. Okay, maybe we'll finish this last piece. Kol echad ve'echad noten berosho. Nasi ve'av beit din nami nishkalu inhu v'ninhu b'reishehu. It says everybody puts ashes on their own head, but wait a minute. The Gemara said, let the Nasi and the deputy Nasi. Well, shouldn't they also put ashes on their own head? What's the difference? Maishna de shakel inish acharina umanach lahu. What's the difference with regard to them that someone else places the ashes and places it on their heads, and everybody else places it on their own heads? And the conclusion is, Amar Rabbi Abba Damin Kesari. Eino domeh mitbayesh me'atzmo lemitbayesh me'acherim. There's no comparison between a situation where you are humiliated by others and humiliates himself, and he's humiliated by others. It's much, much more humiliating to have somebody else put the ashes on your head. And because it increases the humility and the humiliation and the degradation, to have the leaders have someone else place the ashes on their head. And then the conclusion here is, where do we place it? Where do you put it? And Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, in the place where you put your tefillin, your head tefillin, because in the verse from Isaiah is Lasum la'avelei Tzion l'teit lahem pe'er tachat efer, to appoint to those who mourn in Zion, to give to them an ornament instead of ashes. But well, the point here though is pe'er reminds us of tefillin, because tefillin is considered a pe'er, a glory, a glorifying ornament, teferet, something beautiful that beautifies the person. And so in the space where we are beautified, glorified, that's where we put the ashes when we're in mourning. Okay, so we'll get to the rest of the Gemara next. Oh, here's a little picture of where you put the ashes. Okay, so, and again, as I said, it's appropriate this week, given that it was Ash Wednesday, and that's where people were putting ashes on for Ash Wednesday. So, all right, so it's once again, we've run over a little bit from the hour, but at least we got through the first chapter. Yasher Koch to everybody, and we'll keep moving along chapter number 2. And it's not coming up for a few weeks, but March 7th we'll start a little bit later, because Federation is having some kind of a program, and the rabbis in the community are supposed to participate. So it's from 10:30 to 11:15. And so that week, in March 7th, I'll remind people, March 7th will start at 11:15. Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank
You're very welcome. Everybody take care. Have a good Sunday.
Have a good week, everybody.
Take care.
you.